Oh, hi! This week, I come to you from my favorite piece of furniture in the whole house. I've been playing D&D in this corner and had videos set up and finally realized oh, this would actually be a pretty good sewing nerd filming spot. So hi, hello. There's a sleepy puppy next to me, so if you hear him snoring, that's what that noise is. Also, I'm in a tremendous amount of pain because periods. So I'm gonna make myself cozy while I tell you about the skirt that I made this week. The thing I kept harping on wanting to overcome my fear of this year is pleats. What better time to try them out than now? I've done some pleating in the past, but nothing I've ever really been proud of or thought was at all good. And I wanted to wrap my head around them a little better. I do have a giant glaring question for some of you at the end, so if you would like to give me some advice, I'd appreciate it. But that's the very last step, and let's walk it back and start at the beginning. So this was actually a project born of me finding fabric that I really liked and not finding a different pattern that I wanted to use it for. And I just used that red wool dress last week that had all the pleating, and I could just picture this being a pleated skirt. So that's what I tried turning it into. I didn't want to overcomplicate this and turn it into a whole dress, though I think that would look pretty. This is certainly one of my favorite colors, so I won't mind wearing this all the time. But I think pleating the fabric down and putting it into just a basic waistband was the move, so I didn't immediately overwhelm myself. Also, if you're noticing me dancing in a lot of the B-roll clips, it's because my partner gifted me amazing Bluetooth headphones that are also noise canceling, and it just helps me really stay in the zone. And I'm often listening to music, which I haven't done in a really long time. I make the DJ Bog Troll mix CDs for Patreon pals every year for my birthday month, but that's really the only time I kind of go through and intentionally listen to music, where I'm either talking on a video chat app or listening to podcasts and audiobooks, which aren't bad, but I forgot how joyful music makes me, especially when it's ska, which is what I'm listening to in all of these clips. So before I did anything else, I pressed out this fabric. This was thrifted, and it definitely had some sun damage from wherever it was sitting before I acquired it. I did my best to press out any of the creases or anything in it. I think I actually got it looking pretty good, but there are some discolorations. I'm hoping they aren't super noticeable amongst all the pleats because there's so much else going on, and there's so few lines of it that I'm probably not even gonna remember that they're there after like 2 wears of this. I don't know if y'all know this about me, but I don't stop wearing things when they have holes or stains on them, depending of course, but I have jeans that have a giant swatch of black paint on them from a project I was doing years ago, and it's still the pants I wear the most. And my boots have scuff marks all over them. It's just, they get used. They're serving their purpose and they're still functional. I like wearing things until they can no longer meet my needs. But we are already going on some tangents, huh? I have figured out that periods do make my wonky brain wonkier. It worsens most of the symptoms of depression, anxiety, and the ADHD, so I'm gonna do my damnedest to stay on track here. But just so we're clear, I am barely holding it together. Breathe. Once my fabric was prepped, I did measure my waist, and because it's worth saying, when you're taking your own measurements to make clothes, don't suck things in, because you want the things to be comfortable, and unless you want to suck things in the whole time you're wearing it, I wouldn't suggest doing that. Make sure you can move around. You get some wiggle room. You get some ease going. I also decided that my skirt was going to be 21 inches long, so I cut off a ton of length at the bottom. I don't know how much yardage is here, but I feel like I had a lot of fabric because I still have so much, even though I used a ton of it for this project. So I had 2 long lengths of this fabric that were the same size as each other. So what I did to keep a full front piece with no seams happening is I cut one piece in half, and then I took each of those halves and set it to the right and left of that full piece so that any of the seams weren't going to be front center. And also I'm going to have a back zip. There's going to need to be an opening at the back anyway, and this just seemed the most even way to distribute things. I will say the difference between measurements for gathering and pleating is you got to be way more precise about pleats, because I wasn't sure if I was going to have enough fabric for this. You kind of got to triple up your measurements to get enough fabric, because when you take the fabric you want to pleat you have to fold it over itself basically 2 more times, so there's 3 layers of fabric, meaning you gotta multiply your measurements by 3. Or if you're gathering, there's not such specific math going on, and turns out does actually go quicker. I theorized last week that it maybe took the same amount of time. Now that I have done the pleating, I have different feelings about it. Anyways, first construction step is just attaching those side panels to the big front panel. I did use the selvage edges. I didn't cut them off because I wanted to press the seam open because I didn't know where it was going to line up in the pleats, and I wanted it to lay as nice and flat and flush as possible, and you get a nicer pressed out even looking seam if you have the seam allowance pressed open, like off to each side instead of having both layers pushed to one side. So if you don't have selvage edges to use, which you're really not supposed to use because it's a completely different consistency to the rest of the fabric, but I digress. Otherwise I would have just serged those separately and then pressed it open instead of serging both layers together. Then I'd like to give myself a pat on the back here because I microwaved my coffee and remembered it while it was still hot. A goddamn miracle. This is where I figured out if I actually had enough fabric or not. My waist measurement was 33 inches, and that times 3 is 99, and thankfully I had just enough, because once the seams were sewn together and accounting for some seam allowance for the back closure where the zipper is gonna go, I actually had about 108 inches of fabric here. So the width of the fabric I started with had to have been wider than the standard like 45 inches, but it wasn't quite 60. Regardless of how many panels you would have to put together to fit you, just try to keep your length from having a center front seam. It was something I was trying really hard to like be aware of and think ahead and plan for, which, as you'll find out at the end, doesn't always get me all the way there. While I had the fabric folded to check how long everything was and make sure I have enough, I did mark the front center point because that's where I'm going to start my pleating from. Oh, also I did serge the top edge and the bottom edge just because this fabric really wanted to fray and it was going to get a lot of handling. So I don't really know what made me want to do 2-inch box pleats, but that's what I went for. Had I done 3 inches, I could have used one of my grid rulers that I have. And listen, measuring all of this out by hand for each pleat will get a more precise, perfectly even at every single pleat. I would get a mat like I have with the gridded markings, or just go with a ruler and be really diligent about measuring everything out. What I decided to do is take one of those dollar store cutting boards that I've used for previous projects to get like reusable patterns and stuff, and I cut a strip that was 2 inches wide, and then I marked the center so that as I folded the fabric in, like I lined that brown line up with the center pin, which marks the center front of the skirt. I wanted to make sure that pleat was facing out. Like there's going to be hidden pleats and front line pleats. I don't know how to differentiate the two. There's probably terms for that. But that's the only one I really cared about, what it looked like and where it was. So I flipped the fabric to the wrong side and then folded each side of the center towards that middle line. Made it so it looked even. And I initially thought I could just pleat the top, and then realized part of a pleated skirt is those lines are pressed all the way down. Yes, it flares out and the pleats aren't sewn into place at the bottom, but the lines are still pressed, and that's what gives it the cool shape. So I had to pin both the top and the bottom, and I just did 1 pleat each side. It was easier if I kept flipping the fabric to the right side and the wrong side so that I was always folding with that little ruler visible to me. So it's a pain in the ass, and you can see me realizing just how long this is going to take me and committing to it. I did want to bail on this project a bunch of times, but I stuck through, and I'm very proud of myself for that because this was tedious. This is where I switched to a podcast because I was just getting very bored with my hands working through this, and music just wasn't cutting it. So one episode of Delete This Later, that's Hank Green and Catherine Green's podcast. It's one of my top 5 favorite podcasts in the world. So I pleated my little heart out until I got a measurement basically about my waist measurement. And I feel very lucky because I didn't know how this was gonna go, but it looks like, luckily, the ends of my skirt measure out so that my zipper, the back seam, is gonna be at the edge of a pleat. I don't have to have like a partial pleat going on. It'll be full panels either side of the back seam. So it's gonna look even all the way around, which could have gone a multitude of other ways, considering I had no idea what the fuck I was doing. I did add 1/2 inch, or was it 1 inch? I literally sewed it earlier today and I can't remember what I did. I think it was 1 inch. Whatever your preference is. I like having a little bit more meat for seam allowance when I'm putting a zipper in. As a lot of commercial sewing patterns say, finish seams in the preferred method. Okay, here's the very satisfying shot of everything pinned bottom and top. All the pleats look really nice. It was very cathartic looking at it after all of the time it took to do this. And then I realized how much more time it was going to take to press all this out, because I really, really wanted to take my time and make it all look neat and not just rush through this and make them all look wonky. A previous version of me really doesn't like doing the fiddly bits because I feel like it's almost a waste of time, but it's not, because it's going to make me like the garment more and it's going to look nicer. And I'm more proud of the work I did on this skirt than I have ever been of any other pleating I've done, because I put the effort in. I whole-assed it. Okay, and once it was all pressed, I kept the pins in and I went over to my sewing machine and did a long basting stitch just to keep everything in place, because I didn't want to lose any of this definition. I figured it'd save me time and a headache down the road. As you can see, I wasn't quite sure how to handle the end edges, and I was gonna start cutting off the excess fabric and then realized, wait, I serged the initial raw edges, and if I cut this, it's gonna need to get serged, but the serger cuts the fabric as it stitches, so why wouldn't I just run it through the serger? There is a phrase that goes, work smarter, not harder, and I even wrote work harder, not smarter, which I feel like really sums up my approach to most things. I am really good at making stuff more difficult for me. So once all the pleating was done and everything was in place, I decided to make a really quick waistband. I took that measurement of 33 inches. I added half an inch either end, which made 34. So I just cut a strip that was 5 inches wide, because once the waistband was folded over, like folded in half, it was going to be about 2.5 inches. And even here, I could tell my line work was a little wonky, so I actually went back and remeasured it. I'm getting better at the finessing on my projects. Now, normally I do only interface half of the waistband, like the lower half, but because this fabric is tripled up and it's kind of a heavy fabric, I wanted to give the waistband as much structural integrity as possible, so I interfaced the entire thing just to make it a little stronger. Then I serged one of the long edges of the waistband and both of the short edges. Then I pressed it all in half, and I also pressed in that half inch that I added for the seam allowance, just to have that already ready to get folded over when I needed to call upon it. I also decided to try adding interfacing to the seam allowance where the zipper is gonna go. I've never added anything here, but I've seen it in a couple sewing books and thought, I have tiny scraps to use up. I don't know where else I would use a piece this tiny. Couldn't hurt, didn't hurt. Survived it. I just wish I had done it before I serged the edges, because I did go back over it. Okay, so here's my thinking with the zipper situation. I've made a bunch of skirts with lighter weight fabric and just less material overall, where I've had the zipper go all the way to the top of the waistband. I'm worried about the weight of this skirt, and not having any closure above the zipper would like pull it open, you know? So I decided to end the zipper at the top of the skirt panels and just kind of tuck it into the waistband, and then do hook and eye closures on the actual waistband. I laid a 7-inch zipper across the center back edges, marked where the bottom of the zipper was, like the little metal zipper stop. Then I sewed that back seam right sides together, normal stitch length from the bottom to that mark, and then I switched to a basting stitch to go up the rest of the skirt. I would press this open, but I already had the lines pressed in, so that cut out like one tiny step here. Then I hand basted the zipper into place so that the actual zipper teeth lined up with that center seam. This has been the thing that's helped my zipper placement look a lot better, is like actually taking the time to hand baste it into place, because I've had wonky shit happen almost every time I haven't done this. Hi, hey, hello, it's me from the future. When I was importing all the files off the memory card I was recording onto my laptop, an entire like half-hour clip got corrupted and there's no saving it. I tried and I'm at my wit's end with it. So here is a lower energy version of the rest of it. I think we were up to the part where I was about to attach the waistband, and I did mark a little notch at the center of the waistband and the center front of the skirt. I should have done it when I pinned the center front of the skirt at the beginning of the process, but here we are. I just took my time lining everything up. The zipper fold that's in place from us attaching the zipper, right, is gonna stay in place, and we're gonna have that waistband seam allowance, that extra half inch, hang past where the zipper is. I'll show you how I'm gonna fold all this up afterwards, but just trust the process. So I think I said that you need to press the waistband long ways in half as well, but if I didn't say that before, make sure that's done. I'm going to press that seam allowance I just did, attaching the waistband to the skirt, up into the waistband. That serged edge of the waistband we did earlier, that's going to tuck to the inside of the skirt. And I do a bigger seam allowance when I'm attaching the waistband to the skirt because it gives this flap, this serged edge, a little bit more wiggle room so that when I top stitch from the front, I do stitch in the ditch to close up the majority of the waistband. There's less risk of it not catching because I've had that before, and I know that means I should just get more precise about my sewing, but I want things to be fun to make, and if this is an easy way to make it less of a headache for me, I'm gonna continue doing it this way. This is the joy of being self-taught. There's no rules. There's probably ways to do all of this that are better than the way I've done them, and I've certainly learned ways to not do things. So I'm always happy to hear suggestions on other techniques to try or ways to go about things. I promise we're almost to the thing that I do need help with. So this is how I'm folding everything up. The zipper tail that's left at the top here, I'm tucking up into the waistband. I'm folding that seam allowance over it so it's like nice and tucked in. And then I'm folding that finished edge over so that there are no raw edges sticking out anywhere at the edge of the waistband. I am going to hand sew this closed. I'm also going to add a hook and eye closure here by hand. I did add 2 hook and eye closures, one at the very top and one like halfway down. Okay, back to this final step with the actual sewing machine. Once those ends are folded down, I am gonna lay everything nice and flat, line up my machine needle with that seam on the front of the skirt, and I'm gonna stitch right in there to attach that underside of the waistband to the front. And then I moseyed in here and did all the hand sewing. I did also have one fuck up that needed to get fixed. There was a pucker on one of the pleats, and of course it was one like right in the front. I would hope I would have fixed it regardless of where it was on the skirt, but especially it being like one next to the center panel, I had to go back in, unpick it, and just zhuzh things a little so it laid nice and flat. So once that was fixed, hand stitched the ends of the waistband and then added the hook and eyes, and now time to try it on. I was very excited with how it looked. It just hangs beautifully. I'm so proud of myself for taking the time to do this. Now, as you may have figured out already, the thing I need your help with is how the fuck do I hem this? I have some past work trauma about hemming being the last step. So I have it in my head, like, no matter what, hemming's the last step. But I feel like in a situation like this, I wonder if I should have hemmed it before I even pressed anything out. The thing is, if I go to hem it now, I'm basically gonna have to replete the entire fucking bottom of this. I will do it if that is like the thing I should really, really do. But if any of y'all have suggestions or experience with this, I'm really proud of how the skirt came out. The discoloration on the fabric is not showing, like I can't tell where it is. The side seams are on some of the outer pleats, but it's fine. Side seams are gonna happen. I can't magically make fabric not need to be attached to extra pieces of fabric. So that doesn't bother me, and it fits great. I think the hook and eye closure I should have sewn a little like further into the waistband. They're a little on the edge, so there's a little bit of gapping, but listen, I am so tremendously bloated right now that I need that extra little bit of give, so I'm okay with it being there. I want the clothes to fit me. I would like to keep the skirt the length it is as close as possible, and I am wondering, like, is bias tape binding or some other kind of binding an option here? Don't know what's gonna look nice, and I don't want to totally fuck this up because this is something I would like to keep in my wardrobe. And I do really like how it's hanging right now at the bottom, so I'm tempted to keep it as is, but I don't know if I'll hate it and if it looks unfinished, so thoughts and prayers, please. Okay, I have recovered from the really rough bout I was heading into when I filmed the clip you're about to see. It did involve some lying on the floor, but everything's okay. I haven't fainted or thrown up, so this is certainly not the worst ride I've had as far as this goes. Thank you for sticking with me through this. Well, the bean has presented himself, and the lightheadedness has set in, which traditionally is surely followed by either puking or fainting. Sometimes it's a double hitter, so I'm gonna go. Quickly, I'd like to thank everyone over on Patreon. It's cause of y'all I get to do this, and when I'm feeling as absolute shit as I am today, I can still get work done from the comfort of my home. So thank y'all for letting that be a thing I get to do, and we will see you next Friday with another video. Thank you so much for hanging out. Hey Bert, quick question. Why you so stinky? Oh God. Gotta love old dogs.